You're listening to the Mind Takeaway podcast with your hosts, Mira and Peter.
In our quest to help create a world without inequality, poverty and war, we share insights gained through our work about leadership, psychology and creativity.
You will also hear conversations with ordinary people who do extraordinary things due to their increased awareness, curiosity and intuition, plus their deep connection with others.
Welcome to another micro episode of the Mind Takeaway podcast.
Welcome.
So this is, I think, the second in the series of just a different angle. We call it What Gets in the Way. And we quite often talk about these topics with our clients, and this one is one of our favorites. In fact, this is probably the most impactful topic, and one of the things where when people realize the power of listening, then I never get bored of this when people see the true impact of becoming a better listener.
Yeah. It's interesting though, we looked at the episodes we recorded so far and we realized that that one wasn't there.
We actually believed that we'd made numerous episodes about listening, and I know it's come up in many, many conversations for sure, but apparently this is the first episode that's actually got the label of listening, so here we go.
Yeah. So, just to go back a little bit before what gets in the way of listening, maybe we just make a distinction in between what is, apologies, we're getting distracted with squirrels that are running around trees. So what is the difference in between hearing and listening? So basically hearing is you being triggered with a sound or a word, or it triggers some of your previous knowledge, it triggers your memories, it triggers your thinking. And listening is a state in which you are fully present and open to hear something new.
And quite often you might hear us in previous episodes saying listening to understand rather than, for example, active listening, because, correct me if I'm wrong, Mira, active listening is actually giving you more work to do because you are actively doing something to therefore listen. What we're pointing at is listening to understand is basically listening while you've got nothing on your mind. But when we say nothing on your mind, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek because you'll always have something on your mind, but it's doing your best to just listen to the other person, giving them the gift of your time and your focus, and not trying to reply until they've finished, and then reflecting on what they've said, and maybe checking in on what we would call maybe calibration and saying, so what I've heard is this, and then getting a consensus between each other. And then that's really what we're pointing at. It's such an impactful thing to do. We were actually working with a team of senior leaders last week, and once we slowed them down to see the power of listening between themselves as a team, but also cross-functionally and with other people in the organisation, I think they understood the true impact of how that can be really transformational.
Mm-hmm. And so the key thing is really listening to understand and being present and not be somewhere else in your head. So what gets in the way? What gets in the way of us doing this?
Yeah, so what gets in the way? Fear, overthinking things, thinking that you know better than the other person, your ego. So I'll give an example. And I was guilty of it sometimes. You know, I'm the boss, I know better than the rest of the team. And sometimes you're just not aware of it, but then you're not checking in, you're not listening, you're not open to new ideas, you're not getting the data off your team, which is really vital. And you just go and do something based on, well, I've got more experience, I know better, that kind of thing. And that's when it can be dangerous, because quite often I didn't, obviously. And quite often people don't know better. And when they don't check in with other people and collaborate and work out what can be done as a collaborative, collective way of doing things, then quite often we get what we pay for. You know, we could be wrong. And it's okay being wrong. Obviously, you're going to learn from it. But what we're pointing at here is that there's always valuable data, insights, and information at your disposal if you're willing to slow down enough and let go of your ego and say, well, okay, maybe I don't have all the answers or information. Let's check in. Let's listen to other people.
And the other big thing that we've noticed so it's the assumption that you know better, as Peter said, time and habit of being, you know, we need to do things quickly, and then we don't allow the time for listening. And it doesn't take long, and it saves lots of time in the long run, but in that moment, in order to be present, you need to be let go of everything else that you should be doing.
Yeah, it's a good point. That the time, I would say, is one of the biggest things that gets in the way of being able to listen to understand, because in this fast-paced, frenetic world that we're in, with technology around us and everything zapping our focus, quite often when we're really busy, it just doesn't make sense to set a time aside to even listen to ourselves. And yeah, we're not just talking about teams and collaboration, all of that. It's actually about listening to ourselves more than often, because if we're not really listening to ourselves, how are we doing, and checking in with ourselves, it's going to be probably a lot more challenging to check in with anyone else.
The other thing is waiting to reply. Is when somebody is talking and then you're waiting to reply, and that is, you're then absolutely not listening. In your head, you're holding the answer, you're holding your own opinion in that moment, and you're absolutely not there.
And it's a difficult one, because if you've been used to that way of working, then it takes time to become a better listener. I mean, even for us, even though in the work that we do as coaches and consultants, we can always improve our listening skills. So what I would suggest is be curious about this and really see it as a lifelong learning experiment. We can always get better. And I can tell you many examples of Mira and I where we're like, okay, we weren't really listening as deeply as we could with the client. Let's look at this. And, you know, these things will get in the way. So fear, feeling uncomfortable, tiredness, going too fast, all of these things will get in the way, but that's okay as long as you're willing to notice them and go, okay, well, I can definitely improve in this area. When I check in with this other person on my team, I'm going to look at it in a different frame this time. I'm going to listen to understand. I'm going to set aside time in this meeting to listen to everyone's opinion.
Yeah, imagine how many problems could have been avoided if we just listened to people telling us.
And I'll give you an example, patience, which is linked to time. So as Mira said, quite often we're already forming a reply or what we would like to say as an answer to what we've just heard. But what if I was to say that, you know, wait for the silence, be a connoisseur of letting the person speak, but also leaving the time for reflection, because quite often we think we know what we're going to say next, but quite often we don't. And it's actually being willing to be okay with that. And one of the main takeaways from the team we were working with last week was that, wow, it was really uncomfortable to do a listening exercise and not be able to reply. And sometimes there was silence, and it was really uncomfortable not being able to just say something in return. But when they got more comfortable with those silences, they could see the impact that those silences have. Because it's only in those silences that you can actually work out what makes sense to say next, rather than just a regurgitated way of replying. And quite often your reply after that reflection is much more rich, it's probably more valuable, and it's probably going to be more valuable for the person that you are listening to as well.
So what you're saying, that also what gets in the way is feeling uncomfortable in the silence. And I think one of the things that also is uncomfortable in the unknown, because we think that we need to know the answer straight away, and sometimes allowing this few seconds of silence can actually help you to come back with a good answer.
Yeah, and you'll have to get used to it because it does feel uncomfortable, even for us, even though this is a key part of our work day in, day out. I definitely get still uncomfortable. I might be having a conversation with a client and suddenly I don't know what to say and I might be up in my head and I'm feeling uncomfortable instead of just giving them the gift of my time. But that's okay too. And quite often I'll have the transparency and trust with my client and say, hey, wasn't quite listening there. Let's rewind. Sorry about that. Can you just run back over that again? Because what I heard was this, and and it's just checking in. And you can do this with your colleagues. You can do this with your team. And once you get that level of trust and that level of transparency, that's when all the good stuff happens. That's when you have real impact. That's when creativity and collaboration happens. And that's where you can get everyone deeply curious.
Yeah, and this is where we avoid conflicts. And this is where we go, oh, actually, the idea is good. Maybe just something needs to be changed. And so it's a huge, it took me a while to understand how important listening is, and I did understand, and I'm still discovering. So get curious about it.
Yeah, if anything, just get curious about becoming a better listener, and just get curious about listening to understand. So it's literally listening, as we said, without having any regurgitated way of replying, and giving someone the gift of your time by slowing down enough to just allow that free flow of conversation and get connected, really. So yeah, hope you've enjoyed this one. As always, let us know what you think, and thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
You made it to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. Are you looking for one-to-one coaching? Do you want to develop your leadership skills? Would you like to improve your team's performance? Drop us an email at info@themindtakeaway.com. We would love to hear from you.